Hey guys, Chris here with Work to Game, and today I'd like to talk about a new wave of news that's been coming out early this year about how several media outlets have been starting to cover that gaming might be an addictive disorder and why it should possibly be classified as one. This is centered around the World Health Organization actually putting gaming disorder into its beta draft of ICD-11. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in and talk about this. So ICD is the International Classification of Disease and has been the standard in many parts of the world for quite a while now. And it's how we classify diseases and other, health problems, such as all the way from like mental illness all the way to just like a broken arm, anything in between. And it's grown quite a bit over, its multiple iterations. ICD-9 was first kind of introduced in 1979 and classified roughly 4,000 procedures and over 14,000 diagnosis codes into a 3 to 5 digit alphanumeric code, and you would think that that should cover it, but medicine is quite a bit more complicated than that, and so over the years they developed what's called ICD-10, which was released in the US in 2015, so it'd been quite a ways in between, and was set to update this to around 72,000 procedural codes and 70,000 diagnosis codes. And so naturally this has a few extra digits. This starts to better aim at documenting what we know, and so we've learned a lot about medicine since 1979, and we want to also be able to track not only outcomes but cost. And so you want to know if somebody broke their arm, how did they break their arm, what kind of break was it, what treatment did we prescribe, and how did that work for that. And so the more specific these codes could get, the better we can look at the system as a whole instead of as an individual patient and look for trends and things that we can do to make medicine better. That's the theory. Now, of course, in addition to this, this does allow payers to go through and say, okay, we'll pay for the 9 of the 10 types of X, and we'll pay for 7 of the 11 types of Y, and so ICD-10 has people that are for it and against it, and just to be clear, we are not going to be talking about any form of left or right politics today, just the system as it stands and how gaming being classified as a disorder fits into all of this. Now with ICD-10 here in the US going decades between, implementing one and implementing the next, them beginning to talk about betas is just the beginning of the conversation, but news outlets cover this to varying degrees. Their job as an industry is to bring you the news that you are interested in and simplify the stories enough that an everyday person with a wide array of knowledge can listen to a varying amount of each topic and get a feel for it. And so they want to make sure that it can not only be understood, but that it can be palated in a condensed enough version that if you have 1,000 things you want to know about, you'll go read all 1,000 stories instead of being overwhelmed by the first one and moving on to the next news source. And so some of them, like ABC7 of Detroit, feel that it's a public service announcement. That's all this is, and they're just updating us on this like they would update us on the opioid crisis. So they can be short and to the point, and they can warn us that we just need to protect our children and that this is a sign that games are the problem, and that this is proof that setting loose rules on, what time your kid can play games, how long they can play games, what kind of games they play, is all factoring into this mental health, and they're immediately taking it as fact, and it's so condensed down that that's all you're getting is the scary part of this story, which there is a scary part. Now, some of the similar outlets, such as Daily Nation, go so far as to summarize their article by claiming, just whole statements that say things like, the WHO includes gaming disorder in its list of mental health conditions, making it an official diagnosis that can be used by doctors and other health specialists. Now, this is unfair because without digging deeper, we wouldn't know that 2018 is just when ICD-11's review is happening, not its implementation, much less in a specific country. In this case, we're talking about the US. There is still room for it to change within the context of ICD-10. ICD-11 is seen to be more of a revision of ICD-10 than the total overhaul that 10 was to 9, but ICD-10 includes a lot of weird codes, such as injured while sleeping, pecked by a turkey, sucked into a jet engine, water skis on fire. There are things in there about the relationships with your in-laws and all this stuff. And so, yes, some of these codes are probably used all the time, but some of these codes are very, very specific. And so even if a code is put in ICD-11, if it's to the same number of diagnosis codes that ICD-10 is, that doesn't mean that that code is common or that you totally understand the context in which it's meant to be used. There is a whole slew of codes in ICD-10 about astronauts and about things that can happen to you while in space. I don't think those are being used on the general population. And so being addicted, you have to be really careful with how you define that. And so they define that as it has to be observed for 6 months or more, and it has to be getting in the way of just everyday things such as eating, sleeping, bathing, maintaining common and mandatory social interactions such as having a job, interacting with your family, all these things that we just consider part of a well-rounded human being at a base level. And so for gaming addiction, that doesn't mean I like to play games. That means more like, okay, so there was a man that was treated for an addiction to Google Glass when it all came out. And that was proven, right? He was tapping up here even when it wasn't on, and that doesn't mean that we should just give up on augmented reality as a whole because there was one guy and that it can't improve the lives of the general population. Yes, everything has to be taken in context, and you have to, an addiction of any kind, I mean, it's a problem. Addicted to being clean, right? Where I'm washing my hands to the point that I'm almost rubbing skin off and I'm not sleeping because I have to wash my sheets 27 times. You know, a lot of these things, when you dig down deeper, there may be, okay, addiction to Google Glass, but underneath you can find a whole series of other mental health issues that are causing this person to feel that that's their escape. And so it's the same with gaming. And as a side note, that guy he had a history of OCD, substance abuse, depression, and so, you know, maybe we're putting too much emphasis on the wrong item here. Yes, Google Glass is a contributing factor, but if it weren't Google Glass, it could have just been something else. And I'm not saying that, well, if you're gonna die in a car accident, you might as well do hard drugs. That's not what I'm saying here, but that everything has to be taken in context. So there were other outlets that had a clear opposite view of this, to the point where they're ignoring it. So they're ignoring the fact that, like, you know, Pokemon Go has a direct correlation with traffic accidents and accidents especially involving pedestrians, and that these are resulting in some fatalities. They're nonstop focusing on all the positive things that games do. I mean, there's been a TED Talk talking about all the different benefits of gaming. There's been studies that link it to fixing PTSD, helping with dyslexia, helping with lazy eyes, helping with creativity, improving memory, alleviating chronic pain, improving social skills, speeding up your ability to make decisions, putting off unhealthy cravings, right? Because if gaming's not that unhealthy craving, then, you know, maybe it's helping alleviate the desire for something different. It improves hand-eye coordination and dexterity to the point that they're actually tracking it with a lot of the new, like, surgery tools and stuff are so small, and many of them are remote controlled. And so this kind of ability to use almost like a joystick, right, and play asteroids over here can benefit when you're talking about certain types of surgeries and things like that, when it's not necessarily done with just a hand because you're dealing with such small incisions and things now. This is all before we talk about the positive health in specific games. Talking about games that make you dance, yeah, things like the Dance Dance Revolution type things, talking about Rock Band, a whole slew of games that use things like the Kinect or pretty much all of the Wii. These are games that actually improve the sedentary aspects of our lifestyle, which is a downside of gaming. And then there is a whole nother bucket of outlets, and these are going to take the middle road, right? That kind of, we don't really know yet. And so this is things like Geek.com, where they acknowledge this is an interesting change, and it's something that we should definitely keep an eye on. But the jury isn't even out on it, so we don't even know the level of impact that this is supposed to have. Gizmodo points to flaws in the data, talking about how a lot of the data they're using to credit this relies on research such as Reddit surveys, and that a clear consensus is far from possible when that's your data source. And so yes, it's interesting, and it means that maybe that's the justification for a more specific study, not for a total change of our lifestyles. And Absolutely. There are extremes. A man died during a 24-hour charity stream, A World of Tanks, when he was in hour 22 and he got up to take a smoke break. Now, out of that whole statement, which part did you hear? Because quitting smoking can single-handedly cut your chance of a heart-related death by as much as 50%. And so if he was getting up and smoking, it wouldn't matter what sedentary activity he was doing in between. The smoking could have been the major contributing cause. We have a tendency, especially here in the US, of declaring cause of death. And that's it. So if you have 3 types of cancer and you've had 2 strokes and your family has a history of a couple of, very rare diseases, but then you walk out to get your mail and somebody swerves off the road and hits you with their car, that's the cause of death. And all of those other things immediately get lost out of the statistics. And so we no longer necessarily care that if that had not happened, what of these other things was contributing towards, a lack of quality of life or a lack of quantity of life. And so I don't know that gaming is the part of that story I would latch onto, but it is the better headline. And so, playing anything for 24 hours, yes, it was a charity stream, and that's a beautiful thing, but doing anything, if you had to work out for 24 hours, or eat for 24 hours, or just sit standing up awake for 24 hours, that isn't necessarily a healthy thing. And that's not really a fair comparison to say, okay, this guy was sleep deprived, this probably isn't the first time he's done this, he's a smoker, he does a sedentary lifestyle, there's a good chance he's putting things like energy drinks and stuff in his system that are loaded with all kinds of nasty stuff. Don't get me wrong, I drink them, but to say, yeah, it's the game, it's totally the game that's doing that, it's not all of these surrounding things, isn't really fair, especially when you look at, tragic deaths, and any death is tragic. It affects the people in that person's immediate lives. It ripples out and affects all of us every time somebody dies. But the top 10 killers in the US are heart disease, cancer, respiratory disease, accidents. That includes things like drunk driving, texting while driving. That's why those are big pushes, because they all fall in that same category. Drunk driving alone has been documented to kill 28 people a day here in the US. Things like stroke, Alzheimer's, diabetes, flu and pneumonia, which are grouped together, kidney disease, and then last, finishing out number 10, is suicide. Gaming isn't in there. And yes, a few of those could be linked to lifestyle choices that gamers often have. But gamers aren't only gamers. Many of us have other aspects of our life outside of this. If you go jogging, are you a gamer or are you a runner? You can be both. That's not really fair to just instantly go out and tackle one label. I went and looked for gaming-associated headlines, and I really couldn't find that many of them. But lack of fitness and lack of diet sum up almost the entire American population. And gaming is not the entire American population. The average American only walks 2,000 steps a day. The average American only drinks 20 ounces of water a day. These are both things that are directly linked to having heart problems down the road. If you would just adjust those 2 things, and then make sure that we have a balanced view on drugs, both prescribed and not. There's a big difference between having a cigar at your daughter's wedding and smoking 2 packs a day, and there's a whole world of things in between, and wherever you choose to fall on that spectrum, we need to be better about making sure that everybody's aware of exactly what that's going to cause, exactly what that's going to cost, and exactly how long that's going to take effect, and who all it's going to affect. It's not just you. It affects all those people around you. And the majority of your healthcare costs in the US are spent within the last 5 years of being alive. And so when we make these unhealthy decisions, that's 5 years that we're putting our friends and family through, and we just need to understand those risk behaviors. Slips and falls in the workplace kill tens of thousands of people per year. I could only find 11 major news stories about somebody dying related to gaming. And so this isn't meant to be a PSA. This isn't meant to be, oh, this is your welcome, everybody stop for your public service announcement, and let's talk about all these life changes you should make. I'm just saying that I don't see how this is the headline when we have all of these other things going on. And I don't know what the answers to all of those other things are. I don't. They're hard questions, especially when you take them in the context of each other, because we only have resources to fight so many problems in society at one time, and only fight them all to a certain degree. I just don't know why gaming is considered to be on the list. All of these 11 cases seem to be surrounding people with extreme sleep deprivation, a complete lack of movement. So the people that get the blood clots in the legs, they've been sitting there for days on end, and odds are that's not the first time they sat down to attempt that. That's the issue here, not gaming. But there is a concern we need to look at, right? If just like anything else, just like when we look at the NFL right now, the NFL has a handful of people that are having huge issues, and within that handful, there's an even smaller handful that are having issues after they finish their professional career. Most professional athletes are spending huge amounts of money fixing their health after they get out, many of them pushing into bankruptcy. And yes, much of that money was not spent on healthcare. I get that. But there is an unhealthy part to football. It is a collision sport, not a contact sport, in that it's not about one guy getting hit every once in a while when he happens to have the ball and a guy happens to catch him. It's all 11 guys on both sides slamming into each other as hard as they can every single down. And that is causing health issues. That cannot be avoided. Don't get me wrong. I went and watched a football game last night. I enjoy the sport. I played the sport. But to say that it's not causing joint damage, to say that it's not causing brain trauma, that's just false. And so you have to look at, if the professionals are having this issue, how is that trickling down to the everyday people, and is it leaving these people broken beyond repair? Because if gaming is starting to cause those things, we should catch it now, while it's 11 people and it's not tens of thousands every year. So if gaming was tied to this huge spike in avoidable injury or death, and it would be pushed away by society, and I don't want to see it come to that. Football is having a huge pushback here in the United States here. Yes, I'm talking about American football, not soccer. And it hasn't killed nearly the number of people who have died to recreational gunfire, drunk driving, even just texting while driving, which by itself leads to 1.6 million automobile crashes a year. Those aren't what hit the headline. The biggest headline is, you know, the NFL is struggling, and they deserve to be struggling, because we need to talk about concussions that happen during this voluntary activity to the person who played the activity, not to the innocent bystander. It's not the people in the crowd getting concussions, it is the player. And so yes, I think we need to address it, but yes, I also think that in the context of somebody texting while driving hits somebody who wasn't texting while driving, in my mind that's a bigger problem. So even if the numbers were equal, I would still go to the one that's affecting the people who weren't doing the activity. That's my side. If it did become a disorder, let's just talk about that. So if this went through, if it became a disorder documented by the WHO, they have already stated that it would require 6 months of observed time that is characterized by impaired control, with increasing priority given to gaming. That means a gaming disorder is characterized by a pattern of persistent or recurrent digital or video gaming behavior, which may be online or offline, manifested by impaired control over gaming onset, frequency, intensity, duration, termination, and context. It may also be displayed by increasing priority given to gaming to the extent that gaming takes precedence over other life interests and daily activities. The disorder is also characterized by continuation or escalation of gaming despite the occurrence of negative consequences. This is quite a definition to be placed on something that we don't really truly observe objectively. If a gymnast makes it all the way to the Olympics, right? They're usually incredibly young. We don't talk about what it took to dedicate their life to that. And yes, it's exercising, but now we go look at something like race car drivers. Professional race car drivers often have been driving since they were toddlers. I mean, they're put in these cars very, very young, and that's why their reaction times, they're perfect, and the best make it to that level. And we don't talk about the unhealthy level that has on them, and race car driving on its own doesn't require you to be physically fit. Yes, many professionals in many industries, including gaming, work out because that's tied to better sleep, better attentiveness, you know, all of these benefits of being a healthy, well-balanced individual. And I'm not pointing at myself there, I am far from the level of health I'd like to be, but the activity itself doesn't necessarily do it. And for the few that do, things like ultra marathoning, things like gymnastics, they have long-term health negatives that come with those positives. And yet we view these as good things. And so the question is, why doesn't gaming get the same pass? The professional gaming world is bringing in the same amount of money, the same amount of everything else that many of these other professional professions are. Millions of dollars in prize money, These guys train, they practice, and it may be obscure to people who aren't used to this, and maybe it's not their passion. There's all of these interesting things out there that I don't necessarily watch or partake in, but they have that right. And so I understand that this is obscure, but being a professional eater, commentator, there are all of these interesting things, and they all take it being a hobby for many, a profession for some, and for those some, they have to have taken that hobby to a level that it became a profession. They didn't become a professional commentator first and then figure it out as they went. They were, odds are, doing commentating as a hobby, you know, and hopefully they're lucky to be like Day 9 and figure it out in college that that's what they wanted to do. And so you can do it while you have a fairly low burden of stress. You don't have 5 kids, you don't have a wife that's nagging you about, you know, oh, well, I'll just stay up all night and study for this test so that I can go commentate this thing this weekend. He was able to make those sacrifices without a whole lot of compromise to be had. If gaming is labeled as an addiction, I don't know what we should do about it. I don't know what the proper answer is. It's hard. But looking at what they label as it, I'm not worried about it being a large group of people. Yes, I think it's something we need to be aware of, but I also think we need to take it in the context of the same level of passion that people would put towards anything else. I prefer gaming more than doing dishes, but it doesn't mean that I've never done dishes. I prefer gaming more than just about anything else in my life. We call this channel Work to Game, right? I work to make room for things in life that I enjoy, and gaming is a big, big part of that. But it doesn't mean that I'm routinely getting fired from jobs for playing games too much. It doesn't mean that my wife is going to leave me because I'm playing games too much. It doesn't mean that I've never spent time with my family because I play games too much, that I'm behind on sleep or eating, nor does it mean that I'm headed towards that. But that's just my thoughts, and I would love to know you guys. So I hope this kind of brought a little bit of light to the context of it. It's being covered in a lot of different ways on a lot of different media outlets, and it's something that will progress and change. And as gaming gets bigger on people's radar, and yes, that has to do with the amount of money it's taking, yes, that has to do with the amount of players there now are, yes, that has to do with the amount of hours that those players are spending, we're going to see more of this. And so I would love to know what you guys think of that, and which direction you think it's headed, and which direction you think it'd like to head. This has been Chris with Work to Game. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for watching this video. If you want to check out any other videos, you should click over here. And then we've got like some kind of vlog thing down here in the corner. And then we've got like subscribe. Yeah, like that's really, you should totally do it. This was a complete disaster.